I'm here with Josh for another episode of Cold Email Breakdown. And in this episode, we're just going to talk about cold email in general. We're going to discuss different topics that beginners often struggle with. Before we get into it, it's probably a good idea that we introduce ourselves because there's probably going to be people watching this who've never seen an episode before. So I'll start with myself. My name's George. I'm the founder of Email Chaser, which is a platform for sending cold email campaigns. And I make these videos every week to talk about cold email and share that knowledge. And Josh, if you don't mind introducing yourself.
Hi, I'm Josh Michaels. I'm the founder and head of 3 Red Boxes. It's a deliverability agency specializing in outreach. And we've been around for a little bit, and I've been doing deliverability for 6 or 7 years now.
Yeah, so we get a lot of people emailing us asking for agencies or people that they can sort of outsource their cold email stuff to. So anyone watching this, if you need someone to do your cold email campaigns, Josh is definitely the guy. And before we get into the video, if they want to find your website, what is your website?
It's 3redboxes.com, all spelled out. So THREEREDBOXES.com.
I'm also going to make sure to add your LinkedIn profile into the description of this video so that anyone who wants to find you can do so. So to start this episode, I was sort of thinking about the topic of reply rates. In your opinion, what would you say is an acceptable reply rate for a cold email campaign?
So I do think this is a little bit tricky because I've seen reply rates range anywhere from 0.5% up to 15%. The one thing that I try to track more than just reply rate is the actual positive reply rate, right? Because you can get, if you're getting more negative replies than positive replies, why is that happening, right? So I would say my goal in every project that I start is to get to a 4 or 5% reply rate and then work from there. A lot of it's based on the quality of your leads, the quality of your content, making sure you're actually hitting the inbox. But, I've seen a lot of projects where we're getting a 5 or 6% reply rate, but most of them are, take me off your list. You got the wrong person. I'm not interested. It's the wrong company. So it can be a little bit tricky when you're just looking at sheer reply rates.
Yeah. People sharing screenshots of their analytics page with some high reply rate, but what they're not telling you is what you just said, which was maybe majority of those are not even positive. And I think something that's interesting, which might sound obvious to anyone who does cold email, is the whole idea of reply rate versus total number of replies, because sometimes people obsess too much about the reply rate percentage, maybe a 10% reply rate, which would be considered really good, but they don't actually think about the overall number of replies, because you could have a 2 or 3% reply rate, but if your volume is significantly higher, the total number of replies is obviously going to be higher. So I think there's a lot of different strategies to kind of try in the cold email space, and there's I just think sometimes looking at the total number at the end is more important than just, proportionally, what is the highest reply rate.
I also think it comes down to what is your value proposition, right? What is the value of what you're selling? What is the lifetime value? I work with clients where, the value of one deal is 6 or 7 figures. So if I can bring them one positive, good reply, it way outweighs, other clients that I work with where you're talking about, every deal is worth $50. Right. For them, they need a lot more replies for cold email and ROI to make sense, versus when you have those higher value propositions, you can finally target much better, and every single reply means something. It's a lot more valuable than, if I hate to say it, but if you're selling a pair of socks for $2.99, right? You need to have 1,000 replies to make up your ROI versus one good value proposition, one good sale. Obviously every reply doesn't lead to a sale, but In those types of worlds, when you're talking about really high value proposition, you also have a much better chance of actually converting a lead, because if they do reply, they generally know what industry they're in, what they're doing, and what that means.
Yeah. And maybe this is obvious, but if the value of what you're selling is relatively high, then most likely you're solving a really big problem, which maybe is more likely to get the interest of the person you're reaching out to, because if you're solving a big problem, maybe they actually care about that problem. Whereas if you're reaching out to them to sell, I don't know, I'm going to edit your TikTok videos for $10. Well, maybe they didn't care about that. Maybe, I mean, who knows? But
Yeah, it's a lot harder to stay out of the noise, right? I mean, we all get cold emails every day. We all get spam every single day. I was the head of marketing for a company for 5 years. I got untold amount of spam every day because I got on some list, and I would get the old, "Hi, Josh, you work for X. How can, we can get you 30 leads a month" type thing. I got those 15 times a day. So, outreach, especially in the last couple of years, the amount of noise in somebody's inbox has gone up exponentially. Where you used to get 1 or 2 cold emails a week, now you're getting 1 or 2 a day, if not 1 or 2 an hour, depending on what your job title is. You have to find a way to stay above that noise. And generally, when you're working with industries that have that higher value proposition, it can be easier because there's not usually as many people emailing them, right? There's not as many people that have the ability to do deals in that kind of, revenue range.
yeah, I think that's another interesting topic about how saturated is the data source that you're going after. Yeah, everyone uses Apollo or everyone uses whatever platform, but if you can find some kind of data source, which potentially no one's using, and you're sort of custom scraping that data and then enriching it yourself, you're probably going to have a lot higher reply rate just because those people are maybe not receiving the same amount of emails.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I work with a couple clients that their industries are so niche and specialized that the general list acquisition programs, the Zoom Infos, the Apollos of the world, that they don't really work for them, right? Because it's such a specialized industry that they're not going to be able to find those people. So they have found other platforms that specifically specialize in that industry. So you're not getting all of that noise where you're getting every CEO, every C-suite level person, every company in who owns a SaaS product. You know what I mean? They're really able to narrow in. And like you said, those people are not on as large of these lists where they're just getting saturated every single day.
Yeah.
It is easier to get out of that, get out of that normal noise and stand out where somebody might actually notice your email, be interested.
Yeah. I think an example of a really overly saturated data source, which by the way, it could still work. So I'm not saying don't contact these people, but as Y Combinator companies, the Y Combinator's website has a list of all the companies, and so countless people are extracting those founders and then finding their emails and contacting them to sell whatever they have, and those founders are probably receiving dozens of emails per day just from the same kind of stuff. So
yeah, because there are so many lead acquisition software out there now, especially with AI. It used to be Apollo, Seamless, Zoom Info, a couple others, that were out there, but there was now with AI and no code automations and all these different people using this software, there are so many other platforms that are basically doing the same thing. I don't honestly know if they're pulling from different databases. At the end of the day, I did talk to one platform where they said they built their own database, but again, where did they build it from? Right. So it's hard, especially in the B2B world with people changing jobs on a regular basis.
Usually when a platform says they built their own database, what that means is that they're probably just paying a external vendor for that data, and that external vendor probably is just scraping it from LinkedIn or something. That's usually what that means. But the thing is, though, is that even if external vendor is scraping it from LinkedIn, usually that data is not very accurate, because there's a really big difference between trying to scrape tens of millions of leads from LinkedIn when they have really advanced ad scraping systems versus just doing a real-time scrape with some kind of Chrome extension. for a specific search and sales navigator. Like, those two things are very different. And I think people don't really realize that. They seem to think that the data quality is just the same no matter where they get it from, but it's actually not.
Yeah, it's hard. I tell every one of my clients, I tell everyone that I've done an audit for in the last however many years, your lead data, whether it's outreach or it's opted in warm, marketing, your lead data is what drives the entire engine of the car. Without it being done well, whether it's researched well, segmented well, hygiene well, targeted well, whatever it is, if you don't do that, no system is going to run. I don't care how well built the infrastructure is. You could have a home built MTA, home built ESP, home built everything on IPs, and it's still going to fall apart. It doesn't matter. If you're emailing the wrong people in 2025, it no longer works.
Yeah, no, completely agree. Do you think, in your opinion, what is the most difficult part of setting up a campaign for a client? Is it getting the right leads, or is it, determining what kind of offer copy to write? Like, what do you sort of think is the most challenging part?
I think finding the right leads, honestly, is the most challenging. I think the copy is number two. A lot of people say that your technical setup and your infrastructure should be number one, and that's the hardest, but it is hard. It's hard. It's not, I don't believe it's hard to set up. I believe it's hard to maintain a good system that's running consistently month over month over month. But again, I think finding the leads, it used to be you can just do that whole spray and pray kind of concept and buy 100,000 leads and hope a couple people click or reply. Now you'll be in spam faster than you could blink if you start doing that. People want to scale these things. Every client I have where they hit their ROI numbers, they hit their KPI numbers. They're like, okay, we're sending this many. Let's just say 50,000 a month. Hey, we're getting 100 leads. Let's go to 100,000 a month. We'll get 200 leads. Well, it doesn't work that way. It's a diminishing return because how many people can you really find that are that targeted? And the best systems that I've run, the best outreach that I've run is when the client and I work together to find the most highly targeted leads. And it takes time, it takes money, it takes energy, it takes a lot of the work. It's the old concept of the salesman back in the day looking for the right person to sell to. You don't just flip through the yellow pages and pick a random person and try to call them. The more you know about that person, the more you know about what they want, the easier it is to sell to them. So I think the finding targeted qualified leads, especially in outreach, is the most vital part of the entire project.
Do you ever have difficulties with clients who have sort of a different set of expectations than what they need to have? So they might think something, for example, is easier or not as much work than it actually is. Do you ever have those kinds of issues?
Yes. And I don't want to call out any clients. But I've had some that have gotten it from day one and understand that process, either because they were salesmen back in the day or the process they've gone through. And then I've had some who've literally just said, I'm not willing to put the energy and the work in. Here's a list of, I bought this list from Zoom Info of 100,000 people. We're just going to run it and maintain it, and it'll do what it's going to do. I'm not, I put in my C-suite level, my revenue level, my industry, the basic filtering of what it is, and downloaded a list of 50,000, 100,000, and we're going to hit them until it dies. It just doesn't work. It's a concept from 4 or 5 years ago that you can get away with. And with the ISPs and providers these days, there's so much AI behind them that they're reading. It used to be that there was spam words, right? You couldn't say the word free. You couldn't say the word, certain words would trigger spam. Now they're reading your email and they're looking at the intent and the tone behind it. So they know if it's, a normal one-to-one, George and I having a conversation about having coffee, or if I'm trying to sell him something, right? They find the tone behind it. And it makes it much more difficult to stay in the inbox. And I try to explain that to the people. Like, if I'm not sending George an email that George would be interested in, it's going to go to spam because they're monitoring his mailbox. What does George open? What does he click on? What does he send to spam? It's no longer, is your domain reputation good? Is your IP reputation good? Is your content good? Is this content appropriate for the person I'm sending it to? Because they're monitoring every one of our inboxes. They know what I open, what you open, what I click on, what I reply to. They're monitoring all of that, the tone, the style, the types of emails. And if I get a bunch of emails, let's say about football, and I don't like football, and I constantly click spam, no matter how well of an email you write me, if you're trying to sell me a football, it's going to just go to spam. It's game over. It doesn't work.
So maybe two practical takeaways there for anyone watching is, first, make sure your lead list is highly relevant so that you're only contacting people who actually want your type of email. And the second thing is sort of what you discussed there, where in that first email, it's probably not a good idea to try to hard sell someone. The ESPs are going to obviously pick up on that kind of language. So maybe try to start a conversation, make it seem more like a conversation as opposed to just, here's 10 bullet points of why you need to buy me. That's probably going to end badly.
Yeah, short, sweet. My entire goal in outreach is to get my foot in the door. That's it. I'm not, especially my first or second email, I'm not trying to get you to book an appointment. I'm not trying to get you to buy something. It's too much. I'm just trying to introduce myself, and I'm trying to tell you how I can help you, and let's talk. Just start a conversation, get my foot in the door, see if you're interested. It's a softer approach. People are less likely to click spam if you go softer. It's not selling. Outreach is not selling. It's about creating relationships.
And at what point do you like to transition from that initial one or two emails to potentially a conversation, a phone conversation? Do you ever keep it entirely via email, or do you try to set up a call? How do you typically do that?
So I will try to set up a call or book an appointment, or, whatever the conversion is. But generally, I try to keep most of my sequences to be 3 to 4 emails max. The first two, I will only say like, hey, if you're interested, let's talk. Can I show you more information? Can we take this, off of email? Some very, very soft approach to get them to reply. Hey, if you're interested in more information, let's talk. Reply to this email type thing. Maybe in the third email, I will push them to book an appointment. I'll push them to call. But honestly, if they haven't responded in the first two to a very soft touch, the odds of them doing a harder touch, a harder sale, like booking an appointment, which is an actual process, right? You have to get the email, open the email, click a link, sign up a form, get an appointment, show up to the appointment. It's a lot more steps than just clicking a reply. So a lot of times, if I can get away with it, I won't even try for any of that until the person replies. I'm just trying to get them to reply to the email, and then I'll start pushing. Hey, let's jump on a phone call. Let's jump on a Zoom call. Let's jump on a meeting. Here's my calendar.
Yeah, that makes sense. This is just what I personally do, but if someone emails me, even if it's a little irrelevant, I will never mark them as spam. But if they then send me maybe 2 or 3 follow-up emails that are equally as irrelevant, in a short period of time, within a week, all within a week, that's when I start, I'm going to hit spam button here. So I think for anyone watching who's thinking about follow-up emails or messaging, follow-up emails obviously work, but within reason, probably best not to blast 20 follow-up emails back to back.
Yeah, I've run systems that are literally one-off emails, and it's worked really well. I've run systems that are up to 2, 3, 4. I generally won't go past 4 touches. I had one service that I used to work with where they told me that if you don't do 20 follow-ups, it doesn't work. And it's like, there's no way. Like, I don't understand how I'm supposed to maintain deliverability in any way. If you haven't responded by email 15, the odds of you responding by 18 is pretty slim. So you're threading that line, right? You want to see if the person is interested after the first email, but the worst thing you can do is get a spam complaint. If they just delete it, not the end of the world, right? It's probably not a positive signal to Google or Office or whatever provider you're going after, but it doesn't really hurt you that bad. If they start clicking spam, you're in trouble.
Yeah,
right? It's walking that fine line of how many times can I reach out to you before you click spam. And I think it's a little bit different in different agencies and depending on who you're reaching out for. I think some of these higher value proposition ones, you really got to just do one or two because you're not reaching that many people. If you start to get spam complaints when you're only sending to 100 people a day, it's a much higher percentage, right? It really hurts you a lot more than if you're emailing 1,000 people a day.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with all that. And, I guess the last thing I'll say on this topic, which is probably what some people are thinking, is that there's this difference between adding follow-up emails to a sequence versus following up with the same lead maybe once a quarter, for example. And I feel like the majority of people in the cold email space, for some reason, just don't really understand that difference. It's quite an important difference because everyone's talking about adding follow-ups to the sequence. I'm going to send this person a follow-up email every 4 days for forever. Okay, that's a bad idea for reasons we just explained. You're going to get marked spam. But that's not the same thing as having a list of leads that's highly relevant to your business. And maybe only 5% of those leads are actually in the market for whatever you're offering at any one time, which is understandable. So maybe that list of leads can be contacted multiple times over the course of a year. But that's just, there's a way of doing it where you don't get marked as spam, and there's a way of doing it where you definitely get marked as spam. So that's the line to tread carefully.
Yeah, the hardest thing that I've seen, and I've had a bunch of clients that have a large list that they've acquired over time, right? They did cold outreach. They got 10,000 new leads a month. They've emailed them. But instead of taking those 10,000 and, like you said, waiting a month, waiting a quarter, waiting some X amount of time to hit them again, they just keep putting them right back in the system. So month 1 is 10,000. Month 2 is 20,000. By the time you get to month 10, you're 100,000 people, but you've hit that first 10,000 people 10 times, right? 10 different sequences that they've gone into. And it's like, you're just beating them over and over again and just asking for problems. And I'm not against taking those emails, especially if you can trust your open rates, if you believe you can trust them, and segmenting some of those, like you said, and maybe the people that opened, you send them a one-off quickie email, maybe to make it known that you've emailed them before. Please don't put the little colon in front of it, but make it like, hey, I've reached out to you before. Make it something new, make it something positive that can help them, and send 1, maybe 2 in 30 or 60 days. The ones that didn't open, maybe you do it once a quarter, but you do eventually have to sunset these people and let them go. You can't just keep them forever. You can't just keep emailing them every quarter or every 6 months. Eventually, you got to put a timeline on it and say, okay, if they haven't responded within 6 months, 12 months, whatever that time frame is, you got to let them go. Some people say to me, oh, my sales cycle is 18 months, so we need to email them for 18 months. There's a huge difference between an outreach sequence and a sales cycle. People sometimes get those two things confused. Like HR companies that are doing job placement. Well, maybe George isn't looking for a job today, but maybe in 6 months he'll be looking for a job. And I need to keep emailing him until maybe he is looking for a job. And it's finding that balance, right? It's finding the balance between the two. Send them 2, 3, 4 emails to start with. Make them short, make them sweet. If they don't respond, if you really want to hit them again, let it breathe, give them some time. Like I said, if they opened and you trust the opens, I would wait 30 to 60 days, send a one-off email, maybe even make it kind of humorous, right? Stand out, put a little bit of humor in there, right? Like, hey, reaching out to you again. If you're not interested, I'll disappear. Make some kind of humor in there. Make them respond to you. I've literally wrote a campaign one time. It was for a opted-in email system with organic. And it was for people that hadn't opened an email in 6 months. And we sent them all a campaign that basically said, are you still interested in X, what we were selling? And the entire email was just the yes or no. And if they clicked yes, it put them back in, it triggered them back into our normal newsletter sequence. And if they clicked no, it unsubscribed them. It was honestly one of the best marketing things that I've ever done. It had 80% open rates. It had huge amount of click rates. Did a lot of people click no? Absolutely. But now I've cleaned out the people that aren't interested. I don't want those people in my system. I don't want to keep emailing them. We had 30-40% click rates on that campaign for people who had not opened an email in 6 months.
I think what that also shows is how powerful what you say in the email is. Like a lot of people are trying to obsess over these tiny little details that maybe account for 1 or 2% of difference in performance of their campaign. But the reality is, if you're saying something that's actually interesting to the person receiving your email, that's going to make up the majority of the sort of engagement. Yeah, in your example there, you said like yes or no. That was it, and that was actually an interesting thing for people to receive because one, it doesn't look like a typical email. Two, it's actually valued. I mean, you're basically saying, "Do you want me to take you off or not?" And that's they actually want to respond to that.
If you say the word unsubscribe at the bottom of an email, right, in whatever language you put it in, opt out, unsubscribe, do you want to subscribe? People will click it, right? But if you put a big old buttons, a green button that says yes and a red button that says no, they don't really realize that means unsubscribe, right? Some people might, but to them, it's just, no, I'm not interested anymore. Boom, I'm done. I'm out. Nobody ever likes to lose leads. I was the person that didn't like to lose leads. I was a head of marketing 6-7 years ago. I never wanted to lose a lead for the company I worked for. I wanted to email people forever for the rest of my life and never take them off my list. I hired a woman who is one of the best consultants in deliverability that there is. To this day, she's taught me most of what I know. And she taught me that I have to get rid of those people. There's no way to maintain a system with people that don't want to be on my list. You have to give them options to get off. For those that don't want to put an unsubscribe, you have to give people options to get off your list. Whether it's outreach, definitely if it's opted in marketing, you have to give them that out. Otherwise they're going to click spam. It's going to cause issues. We don't need to get into legal stuff. I know outreach with unsubscribes and footers is a big gray area with legality. We don't need to get into all of it, but it's one of those things where you give the person an option to get out of the system, whatever that is. If you want them, reply stop. If you want to be off the list, or put the link in there, give them something where they can do that.
Yeah. Or also do, sort of do what we mentioned earlier in the conversation. Just be very reasonable with the amount of times you're reaching out to someone. Don't reach out to the same person 50 times. Obviously, that's just that's not helping anyone. That's not helping you. That's not helping the person receiving your email. Just keep it all within a reasonable frame.
And it's something to test. Like I said, I generally start with 3 or 4 for most of my clients, and I will track it over the first couple months. And hopefully whatever platform you're using, like Email Chaser, you can look at every one of those steps in the sequence, and you can look at your open rates, your click rates, your reply rates, whatever it is you're going for. And if you're seeing a severe drop off from email 3 to email 4, you're not getting replies, you're not getting clicks, you're not getting opens, just drop the email off. You're only hurting yourself. You're only giving them more chances to click spam at the end of the day, which is like I said, one of the worst things that could happen with a contact, because then it affects all your other contacts. So, every email you send, the open rate, reply rate, click rate, whatever you're going after should go down. Email 1 usually is your best stats. But is it going down in a normal percentage, or is there a huge drop off somewhere?
Yeah.
You consider knocking those emails off, even if you only end up with 2. Maybe that's what works for your industry.
Yeah. Speaking of Email Chaser doesn't currently show you the reply rate for the specific email in the sequence. However, that's a good idea. So I'm gonna add that to our roadmap because that's obviously important. So we've been talking here for a while now. I reckon we should wrap this up. Maybe one more topic. Do you have anything you want to discuss?
No, I mean, like I said, we covered lead acquisition. Honestly, right now, that is one of the things that I've been working on the hardest for the past 4, 5, 6 months, is learning it myself, making it simpler, making it better. I just think that walking into outreach with an open mind as a client is incredibly important. People come in and they want very specific KPIs, very specific goals. They walk in and say to me, Josh, we have to get a 60% open rate. We have to get an 8% reply rate. We have to get this. We have to get that. And I just think having an open mind that it's a process. I hope there is no consultant out there that would say to you, I can guarantee you X. You know, every industry is different. Every list is different. Every content, every niche is different. And just to be open-minded to the goal is to create a positive ROI in your revenue, right? That's what the goal should be at the end of the day.
Yeah, exactly. And there's different ways of achieving that. So coming in with that sort of fixed mindset is sort of counterproductive because you're sort of closing off different possibilities. It's funny you say that because I never really heard someone else put it that way, but yeah, I always get emails from people and they just start the entire conversation saying something like, I need to send 100,000 emails per month. Yeah, that's how they start the conversation. And this is before they've even launched one campaign. It has have any data to kind of see what's going on. It's just kind of funny how people have these fixed views without actually thinking about the situation in a more sort of practical way. Like, let's just start small, see how it goes, and then scale from there.
Yeah, it's almost every client that I worked with in the past couple of years in the agency that I was at, you know, they came in with a goal target number of how many emails they wanted to send a month. Like you said, 10,000, 50,000, 100,000, a million. You know, we need to send 100,000 emails a month. Why? Well, I need to send 100,000 emails a month. Like, and generally it's because of systems that they've tried to run on their own and they're looking at conversion rates that they were able to get, but you don't know what's accurate. You know, why were you only getting a 1% conversion rate? Because you were hitting the wrong people, because you weren't hitting the inbox. You know, I have a client right now that I'm working with that was getting a 0.6% positive reply rate. So he's using that as the equation to figure out how many emails he has to send to get to the ROI, to get to the amount of positive leads that he wants. And I said, before we scale from 50,000 to 1 million to get you that, let's get the reply rate up. A 0.6 reply rate is horrible. Let's get that to 2, 3, 4%. And then we could, you know, reconsider how we're going to do things. So I would just say, look at your value proposition, look at what your goal for your ROI is, get that number as high, get your ROI number as high as you possibly can at a smaller scale, make it work, make your deliverability work, make your system work, and then scale it from there, with keeping in mind that scaling an email, like other things, it's not exponential, right? Just because you sent 1,000 emails and got 100 good replies doesn't mean you can send 2,000 and get 200 good replies. It doesn't work that way. It's a diminishing return. There's only so many people out there that you can keep doing that for. Eventually you will hit a fall off in numbers. When you hit that fall off in numbers, not only does it hurt your ROI, but it hurts your deliverability, because you're passing the point of where you should be and you're starting to hurt your deliverability. Those numbers will go down. You'll get more spam. Your domains will get hurt. Your reputation will get hurt. And then what you had before at that 8% reply rate will now slowly go down to 6, 7, 5, 4, 3, 2% reply rate. And now you're right back to square one.
Yeah, it makes sense. Well, thanks for joining me today. Before we wrap up, let's just let everyone know one more time, how can they get in contact with you? Because I'm sure there's people watching this who may potentially want to use your company services.
Well, hey, George, I had a great time. Again, Josh Michaels, my website is 3redboxes.com, THREEBOXES. I spelled it wrong. 3redboxes, THREEREDBOXES.com. There's information about what we do on there. Again, we specialize in outreach, but we also do deliverability audits. I partner up with other consultants that do incredibly high-end audits for full-on MTAs. They work with the ESPs. They do really high-end stuff. I do some of it with them. So feel free to read out what we do. There's forms on there to sign up. You can get in touch with me on there directly. It goes directly to me. So I will reply.
Thanks. And I'll add your website and link to profile in the description of the video for anyone who wants to check that out. All right. Well, I look forward to our next conversation. Thanks.
Thanks, George.